A March Chronicle on the Potomac by John Burroughs. March 1st, the first day of spring and the first spring day. I felt the change the moment I put my head out of doors in the morning. A fitful, gusty south wind was blowing through though the sky was clear. But the sunlight was not the same. There was an interfusion of a new element. Not 10 days since there had been a day just as bright, even brighter and warmer. A clear, crystalline day of February, with nothing vernal in it. But this day was opaline. There was a film, a sentiment in it, a nearer approach to life. Then there was that fresh, indescribable odor, a breath from the Gulf or from Florida and the Carolinas, a subtle, persuasive influence that thrilled the sense. Every root and rootlet underground must have felt it. The buds of the soft maple and silver poplar felt it and swelled precipitously during the day. The robins knew it and were here that morning, so were the crow blackbirds. The shad must have known it deep down in their marine retreats and leaped and sported about the mouths of the rivers, ready to dart up them if the genial influence continued. The bees in the hive also, or in the old tree in the woods, no doubt awoke to new life, and the hibernating animals, the bears and woodchucks, rolled up in their subterranean dens. I imagine the warmth reached even them and quickened their sluggish circulation. Then in the afternoon there was the smell of smoke, the first spring fires in the open air. The Virginia farmer is raking together the rubbish in his garden, or in the field he is preparing for the plow and burning it up. In imagination, I am there to help him. I see the children playing about, delighted with the sport and the resumption of work. The smoke goes up through the shining haze. The farmhouse door stands open and lets in the afternoon sun. The cow lows for her calf or hides it in the woods, and in the morning the geese, sporting in the spring sun, answer the call of the wild flock steering northward above them. As I stroll through the market, I see the signs here. That old colored woman has brought spring in her basket in those great green flakes of moss with arbutus showing the pink, and her old man is just in good time with his fruit trees and gooseberry bushes. Various bulbs and roots are also being brought out and offered, and the onions are sprouting on the stands. I see bunches of robins and cedar birds also, so much melody and beauty cut off from the supply going north. The fish market is beginning to be bright with perch and bass, and with shad from the southern rivers, and wild ducks are taking the place of prairie hens and quails. In the Carolinas, no doubt the fruit trees are in bloom, and the rice land is being prepared for the seed. In the mountains of Virginia and in Ohio they are making maple sugar. In Kentucky and Tennessee they are sowing oats. In Illinois they are perchance husking the corn which has remained on the stalk in the field all winter. Wild geese and ducks are streaming across the sky from the lower Mississippi toward the Great Lakes, pausing a while on the prairies or alighting in the great cornfields, making the air resound with the noise of their wings upon the stalks and dry shucks as they resume their journey. About this time or a little later in the still spring morning, the prairie hens or prairie cocks set up that low, musical cooing or crowing that defies the ear to trace or locate. The air is filled with that soft, mysterious undertone, and save that a bird is seen here and there flitting over the ground, the sportsman walks for hours without coming any nearer the source of the elusive sound. All over a certain belt of the country, the rivers and streams are roily and chafe their banks. There is a movement of the soils. The capacity of the water to take up and hold in solution the salt and earth seems never so great before. The frost has relinquished its hold and turned everything over to the water. Mud is the mother now, and out of it creep the frogs, the turtles, the crawfish. In the north, how goes the season? The winter is perchance just breaking up. The old frost is just striking or preparing to strike his tents. The ice is going out of the rivers, and the first steamboat on the Hudson is picking its way through the blue lanes and channels. The white gulls are making excursions up from the bay to to see what the prospects are. In the lumber countries along the upper Kennebec and Penobscot, all along the northern Hudson, starters are at work with their pikes and hooks starting out the pine logs on the first spring freshet. All winter, through the deep snows, they have been hauling them to the bank of the stream, or placing them where the tide would reach them. Now in countless numbers, beaten and bruised, the trunks of the noble trees come, borne by the angry flood. The snow that furnishes the smooth bed over which they were drawn, now melted, furnishes the power that carries them down to the mills. On the Delaware, the raftsmen are at work, running out their rafts. Floating islands of logs and lumber go down the swollen stream, bending over the dams, shooting through the rapids and bringing up at last in Philadelphia or beyond. In the inland farming districts, what are the signs? Few and faint, but very suggestive. The sun has power to melt the snow, and in the meadows all the knolls are bare, and the sheep are gnawing them industriously. The drifts on the side hills also begin to have a worn and dirty look, and where they cross the highway to become soft, letting the teams in up to their bellies. The oxen labor and grunt or patiently wait for the shovel to release them, but the spirited horse leaps and flounders and is determined not to give up. In the woods the snow is melted around the trees, and the burrs and pieces of bark have absorbed the heat till they have sunk halfway through the ground. The snow is melting on the underside. The frost is going out of the ground. Now comes the trial of your foundations. About the farm building there awakens the old familiar chorus, the bleating of calves and lambs, and the answering bass of their distressed mothers, while the hens are cackling in the hayloft, and the geese are noisy in the spring run. But the most delightful of all farm work, or of all rural occupations, is at hand, namely sugar making. In New York and northern New England at the beginning of this season varies from the first to the middle of March, sometimes even holding off till April. The moment the contest between the sun and frost fairly begins, sugar weather begins, and the more even the contest, the more the sweet. I do not know what the philosophy of it is, but it seems a kind of seesaw, as if the sun drew the sap up and the frost drew it down, and an excess of either stops the flow. Before the sun has got power to unlock the frost, there is no sap, and after the frost has lost its power to lock up again the work of the sun, there is no sap. But when it freezes soundly at night, with a bright warm sun next day, wind in the west, and no signs of a storm, the veins of the maples fairly thrill. Pierce the bark anywhere, and out gushes the clear, sweet liquid. But let the wind change to the south and blow moist and warm, destroying that crispness of the air, and the flow slackens at once, unless there be a deep snow in the woods to counteract or neutralize the warmth, in which case the run may continue till the rain sets in. The rough-coated old trees, one would not think they could scent a change so quickly through that wrapper of dead, dry bark an inch or more thick. I have to wait till I put my head out of doors and feel the air on my bare cheek and sniff it with my nose, but their nerves of taste and smell are no doubt underground, embedded in the moisture, and if there is anything that responds quickly to atmospheric changes, it is water. Do not the fish, think you, down deep in the streams, feel every wind that blows, whether it be hot or cold? Do not the frogs and newts and turtles under the mud feel the warmth, though the water still seems like ice? As the springs begin to rise in advance of the rain, so the intelligence of every change seems to travel ahead underground and forewarn things. A sap run seldom lasts more than 2 or 3 days. By that time there is a change in the weather, perhaps a rainstorm, which takes the frost nearly out of the ground. Then before there can be another run, the trees must be wound up again, the storm must have a white tail and come off cold. Presently the sun rises clear again, and cuts the snow or softens the hard frozen ground with his beams, and the trees take a fresh start. The boys go through the wood, emptying out the buckets or the pans and reclaiming those that have blown away, and the delightful work is resumed. But the first run, like first love, is always the best, always the fullest, always the sweetest, while there is a purity and delicacy of flavor about the sugar that far surpasses any subsequent yield. Trees differ in the quantity as well as in the quality of sap produced in a given season. Indeed, in a bush or orchard of 50 or 100 trees, as wide a difference may be observed in this respect as among that number of cows in regard to the milk they yield. I have in my mind now a sugar bush nestled in the lap of a spur of the Catskills, every tree of which is known to me and assumes a distinct individuality in my thought. I know the look and quality of the whole 200, and when, on my annual visit to the old homestead, I find one has perished or fallen before the axe, I feel a personal loss. They are all veterans and have yielded up their life's blood for the profit of 2 or 3 generations. They stand in little groups or couples. One stands at the head of a spring run and lifts a large dry branch high above the woods where hawks and crows love to alight. Half a dozen are climbing a little hill while others stand far out in the field as if they had come out to get the sun. A file of 5 or 6 worthies sentry the woods on the northwest and confront a steep side hill where sheep and cattle graze. An equal number crowd up to the line on the east, and their gray, stately trunks are seen across meadows or fields of grain. Then there is a pair of Siamese twins with heavy, bushy tops, while in the forks of a wood road stand the 2 brothers with their arms around each other's necks, and their bodies in gentle contact for a distance of 30 feet. One immense maple, known as the old cream pan tree, stands or did stand quite alone among a thick growth of birches and beeches. But it kept its end up and did the work of 2 or 3 ordinary trees, as its name denotes. Next to it, the best milcher in the lot was a shaggy bark tree in the edge of the field that must have been badly crushed or broken when it was little, for it had an ugly crook near the ground and seemed to struggle all the way up to get in an upright attitude, but never quite succeeded. Yet it could outrun all its neighbors nevertheless. The poorest tree in the lot was a short-bodied, heavy-topped tree that stood in the edge of a spring run. It seldom produced half a gallon of sap during the whole season, but this half-gallon was very sweet, 3 or 4 times as sweet as the ordinary article. In the production of sap, top seems far less important than body. It is not length of limb that wins in this race, but length of trunk. A heavy bushy-topped tree in the open field, for instance, will not, according to my observation, compare with a tall, long-trunked tree in the woods that has but a small top. Young, thrifty, thin-skinned trees start up with great spirit indeed, fairly on a run, but they do not hold out, and their blood is very diluted. Cattle are very fond of sap, so are sheep, and will drink enough to kill them. The honeybees get here their first sweet, and the earliest bug takes up his permanent abode on the spile. The squirrels also come timidly down the trees and sip the sweet flow, and occasionally an ugly lizard just out of its winter quarters and in quest of novelties creeps up into the pan or bucket. Soft maple makes a very fine white sugar, superior in quality but far less in quantity. I think any person who has tried it will agree with me about the charm of sugar making, though he have no tooth for the sweet itself. It is enough that it is the first spring work and takes one to the woods. The robins are just arriving, and their merry calls ring through the glades. The squirrels are now venturing out, and the woodpeckers and nuthatches run briskly up the trees. The crow begins to caw with his accustomed heartiness and assurance, and one sees the white rump and golden shafts of the high hole as he flits about the open woods. Next week or the week after, it may be time to begin plowing and other sober work about the farm, but this week we will picnic among the maples, and our campfires shall be an incense to spring. Ah, I am there now. I see the woods flooded with sunlight. I smell the dry leaves and the mold under them quickened by the warmth. The long-trunked maples in their gray, rough liveries stand thickly about. I see the brimming pans and buckets, always on the sunny side of the trees, and hear the musical droppings of the sap. The boiling place, with its delightful camp features, is just beyond the first line, with its great arch looking to the southwest. The sound of its axe rings through the woods. Its huge kettles or broad pans boil and foam, and I ask no other delight than to watch and tend them all day, to dip the sap from the great casks into them, and to replenish the fire with the newly cut birch and beech wood. A slight breeze is blowing from the west. I catch the glint here and there in the afternoon sun of the little rills and creeks coursing down the sides of the hills. The awakening sounds about the farm and the woods reach my ear, and every rustle or movement of the air or on the earth seems like a pulse of returning life in nature. I sympathize with the verdant Hibernian who liked sugar making so well that he thought he should follow it the whole year. I should at least be tempted to follow the season up the mountains, camping this week on one terrace, next week on one further up, keeping just on the hem of winter's garment and just in advance of the swelling buds until my smoke went up through the last growth of maple that surrounds the summit. Maple sugar is peculiarly an American product, the discovery of it dating back into the early history of New England. The first settlers usually caught the sap in rude troughs and boiled it down in kettles slung to a pole by a chain, the fire being built around them. The first step in the way of improvement was to use tin pans instead of troughs, and a large stone arch in which the kettles or cauldrons were set with the fire beneath them. But of late years, as the question of fuel has become a more important one, great improvements have been made. The arch has given place to an immense stove designed for that special purpose, and the kettles to broad, shallow sheet iron pans, the object being to economize all the heat and to obtain the greatest possible extent of evaporating surface. March 15th. From the 1st to the middle of March, the season made a steady progress. There were no checks, no drawbacks. Warm, copious rains from the south and southwest, followed by days of unbroken sunshine. In the moist places, and what places are not moist at this season, the sod buzzed like a hive. The absorption and filtration among the network of roots was an audible process. The clod fairly sang. How the trees responded also. The silver poplars were masses of soft gray bloom, and the willows down toward the river seemed to have slipped off their bark and on the new in a single night. The soft maples, too, when massed in the distance, their tops deeply dyed in a bright maroon color, how fair they looked. The 15th of March was one of those charmed days when the genius of God doth flow. The wind died away by mid-forenoon, and the day settled down so softly and lovingly upon the earth, touching everything, filling everything. The sky visibly came down. You could see it among the trees and between the hills. The sun poured himself into the earth as into a cup, and the atmosphere fairly swam with warmth and light. In the afternoon, I walked out over the country roads north of the city. Innumerable columns of smoke were going up all around the horizon from burning brush and weeds, fields being purified by fire. The farmers were hauling out manure. I am free to confess the odor of it, with its associations of the farm and the stable of cattle and horses, was good in my nostrils. In the woods, the liverleaf and arbutus had just opened doubtingly, and in the little pools great masses of frog spawn with a milky tinge were deposited. The youth who accompanied me brought some of it home in his handkerchief to see it hatch in a goblet. The month came in like a lamb and went out like a lamb, settling at naught the old adage. The white fleecy clouds lay here and there as if at rest on the blue sky. The fields were a perfect emerald, and the lawns with the new gold of the first dandelions sprinkled about were lush with grass. In the parks and groves there was a faint mist of foliage except among the willows, where there was not only a mist but a perfect fountain fall of green. In the distance the river looked blue, the spring freshets at last over, and the ground settled, and the jocund season steps forth into April with a bright and confident look.